Microphones are live.
Hi, Laura. Hope you feel better. No, I know. Thank you for not sharing your germs.
Good evening. It's 6 o'clock. I'll call this meeting of the Cotati City Council to order. I'm Ben Ford, Vice Mayor, and I'm up here today because Mayor Sparks is participating remotely pursuant to AB 2449, which he'll explain during roll call, which Kevin can do now.
Councilmember Lemus,
Here.
Councilmember Harvey,
Here.
Vice Mayor Ford,
Here.
Mayor Sparks.
Here, and I'm participating remotely due to just cause of having a contagious illness, and there is no one over the age of 18 in the room with me.
And we'll show Councilmember Rivers is absent.
Thank you. If you'll join us now for the land acknowledgement and the Pledge of Allegiance. The city of Cotati recognizes that we're on the ancestral lands of the coastal Miwok, who are the original caretakers of this area. We respectfully acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have been stewarding and maintaining a relationship on this land as knowledge keepers for millennia. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with indigenous communities, but serves as a gesture of respect to the land we are on. Now join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. For this study session, there is one primary public comment opportunity, which is right now. So pursuant to California Government Code Section 54954.3a, members of the public wishing to address the council may do so at the beginning of this special meeting, and such comments shall be limited to this special meeting topic. So there's nobody in the room. Are there any attendees on Zoom, Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor Ford. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon if you would like to make a public comment. Vice Mayor Ford, that will end public comment.
All right, thank you. And we'll move into item 6, the study session, and 6A, discuss revised departmental work plans for fiscal year 2024-25. I'll turn it over to City Manager Obid.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Ford, City Council members. So we, as you all remember, on February 20th, we had discussed the goals and objectives for the upcoming fiscal year 24-25. And in addition to that, we also had a discussion about the potential to move to a 2-year budget. And the consensus, at least the consensus that we came away with, was that the council was interested in that, felt that the year after an election year would be the proper year to start that cycle. And also, I guess the one caveat is the council had requested a little bit more pre-work prior to moving into these study sessions. So something akin to like the team building meeting that was held in 2023, but probably just more focused on goals and objectives. And with the new council after an election year coming together to have that conversation, and then a second meeting to talk about the work plan and kind of go over the details of that. So that would be the primary difference if we move forward with a 2-year budget, which is what we're proposing currently. Also, at the last study session, we did talk about the work plans, both where staff thought we'd be with current year projects and what we're proposing for next year. And the council obviously gave us some direction there as well, which is reflected in the attached work plans by department. And it's pretty colorful, so I'll just walk through them really quickly. But in past years, we've used like a red line to try to delineate when, at least from a staff resource perspective, when we sort of hit our maximum staffing. But it's always felt a little bit of a bit of an inexact science, because in reality, what ends up happening is we might get grants, or we might have some other project that then it's easy and pretty low effort to pick up something and bring it along for the ride. So rather than using like a hard red line, we were proposing like a sort of a stoplight kind of approach. So we have red, yellow, green, and the basic concept here is that green are the projects that we're, at least at this point, we'd be committing to, and making sure that we get those done, pending some, major change during the fiscal year. Yellow would be the projects that may get done, but not necessarily. It depends on sort of how the year goes in terms of availability of resources, but also, grants, a bunch of other, factors that can affect that. And red is unlikely to go, but everything that's either red, yellow, or green has been, it's in those color bands because they've been identified either by staff, or you'll see there's a asterisk after some of them, which were mentioned by one or more council members at the last meeting. So they're identified as some type of priority. So they're in one of the color bands. And then everything below that is either projects that will be completed planned to be completed by the end of this fiscal year, or there are other things that are in the proverbial parking lot. So we don't lose track of the fact that somebody asked for them at some point. In the charts, the ones that have red font, they were added during the current fiscal year at some point. And then we also added columns for lead and support departments off on the far left. That's been a question sometimes too, is, if you see the same project in two different departments, who's leading and who's supporting. But both of them, these aren't they aren't typically for minor things. They would generally be for more significant projects, where it's just a way to document that even if there's a lead department, there might be another department that's contributing significant staff time. So it does impact their total resource availability during the year. And I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I have obviously all the department heads here. The police chief is joining us tonight by Zoom. If there's any questions for the police department that I can't answer, but I'd be happy to take any questions now.
Questions from council members? I will start with Mayor Sparks.
Thank you. I have a whole bunch of questions. How about I go department by department and ask each questions on that page? Would that work?
That's great.
Okay. So under the city manager office, the accessibility plan project, I just wasn't sure what that was. And then I wondered if we could get a little more detail about the microgrid project that showed up in a couple different places.
So the accessibility project is just updating the accessibility plan. So like an ADA access plan. It's a requirement when it's a requirement when an organization has more than 50 employees, and we're approaching that, or we're getting close to it. So we just wanted to get ahead of that, and specifically we're pursuing grants for that if we can find them to do a citywide accessibility plan. The microgrid and EV charging. So the EV charging master plan, I think basically what that is as we're adding new electric vehicles to our fleet, we're getting to the point now where we're running out of, in some facilities at least, we're running out of circuit breakers to tie new level 2 chargers to. So we need to, it's a good time now to look at the overall electrical infrastructure in the different facilities and see what sort of additional electrical infrastructure we need to continue on our path of 100% EVs for all of our vehicles. And then the microgrid part is, I think it's really looking at two facilities primarily. It'd be the City Hall complex, so it'd be City Hall, Community Center, Cotati Room, Police Station. Right now, that's backed up. Well, actually, let me back up a second. So when we redid the roof on the Community Center, there was an old PV array up there that was really old. It wasn't functioning very well. So it was removed and it wasn't replaced because it wasn't worth the money to replace it. But the roof was intended to hold a new EV array, or PV array. So right now, we have a roof that's set for it. We have a backup diesel generator at the police department that generates all of the critical power needs for the complex here. And any power outage at all, that generator will kick on and supply the backup power, aside from a couple minutes of just local battery kind of storage that it's not actually centralized battery storage. It's like UPSs in various locations. So there's, so that would be looking at basically potentially, PVs in this, potentially some battery storage. Probably not getting away from the diesel generator entirely, because if we have extended outages, it still could be necessary, but at least taking the diesel generator out of it for 90+% of all power outages, so it would just, that was what was being discussed in terms of, especially since this is it's an EOC location and it's a community hub for, when there's outages, extended outages. So that's one thing. And the other building is the Corp Yard. So there's a lot of room over there for a lot of roof room for solar, electric solar, if we want to put that on there with some local battery storage also. And the importance of that facility is it's our primary facility that runs all of our water and sewer SCADA systems. And so, if it goes without, right now what happens is the power goes out, the building just goes dark. And then the public works superintendent, who is a real person, has a little portable handheld generator that he runs. He runs outside and runs an extension cord in to plug the SCADA system into it. So it works. It does what it's supposed to do, but especially as we're moving to EV vehicles over there too, we just want to make it more resilient to those types of things. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what the project would propose to look at.
But
Right, to look into microgridding those. Yeah, to see if it would make sense.
one quick follow-up, Laura, if I may. So the accessibility plan, is that primarily about accessibility for city employees, or is this a much bigger deal, sort of look at all our ADA compliance with curb cuts, et cetera?
It's more city facilities, so it wouldn't be general sidewalks, but city facilities, making sure they're all accessible. And undoubtedly, accessibility laws and sort of case law changes so frequently, or has in the past, that, I guarantee you that every time we do a road project, we break out curb cuts and redo them. So I know there's going to be things, but what it does is it basically ranks them. It identifies them all, ranks them, and then as budget allows, you work through them over time.
Thanks. And Mayor Sparks, may I just check before we move off the city manager page whether other council members have any questions on that page?
I just have a question on, I noticed the first item, implement police oversight recommendation, and then I see one at the bottom that says discussion on police oversight models. And so I'm not sure if it's two different things, it should be the same, or?
Yeah, so I guess the debate was, do you show it at, some partially done % by the end of the fiscal
The
year?
discussion shows 100% and the implement shows new, and there's nothing on there for completion.
Yeah, where we landed was that we are going to have the discussion this fiscal year before this fiscal year is up, and hopefully arrive at some conclusion as to what that is. And then whatever that is, it was put in as a project for next year to actually implement that, whatever that is. Yeah, that's why it's split like that.
Okay, Mayor Sparks, go right ahead.
Thank you. me. I had one other question that on this page actually, which was the artificial intelligence. I'm just curious what the AI pilot is. What are we envisioning with that? I'm curious.
So the first thing was trying to work on a policy for how we would use it and what kind of tools we would use. And the pilot would be, we haven't figured out exactly what we would use it for, but there's some candidates that we're looking into. And it would mostly be, at least initially, like internal processes type things, where we could test it out, see how it behaves, make sure it does, it does what we want it to do. Another example of an option that we were exploring was maybe like a chat bot that, is pointed at our Muni code to help people, find stuff in our code quickly, but we don't want to just turn that on to a public facing website until we know how it's going to behave. So that's the pilot part of it. So it doesn't run amok on our website and start pulling in data from who knows where. Want to make sure it's pointed at the right stuff and it behaves like you expect it to.
Start yelling at our residents.
You don't want that, no.
Okay, thank you. On the next, actually, I had thought that was on administrative services, but I saw that was actually support role. So I don't have any questions on admin services. I don't know, Vice Mayor Ford, if you wanted to open up.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything on the admin services page? Yes.
Yes, I was just going to
Councilmember.
make sure admin services, where it says website, department page update, new social media content, just that Spanish was also reflected in there. Okay.
Sorry, yes. So the city website does automatically have the Google Translate that's built into it. And so anything we put on there, we want to make sure if we have, and that's part of what we want to do, is any documents or images that might have words in them that we are incorporating and making sure it's in Spanish as well. And so that's a part of a lot of the cleanup we want to do, but it's just a holistic view of all of that besides the data that is already on there that's translated.
Okay, all right, thank you. Can I just ask a quick question on the AI topic? Are we putting a disclaimer or something on when something has AI? Will we be using disclaimers, or will it just be just a given now that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it'd be part of the policy, to discuss, and that would be, it wouldn't be I don't envision that being a staff adopted, like a staff administrative policy. That would probably be more of a council discussion to
Okay.
develop that.
All right. Go ahead, Mayor Sparks.
Okay, going on to the community development page, I just had one question, which was the code efficiency improvement project. I wasn't sure what that entailed and what that is.
Thank you, Mayor Sparks. This is Noah Hausch, Community Development Director. I'll take the question. So generally, as we work through, providing customer service to our community members or applicants on a specific project, we inevitably identify either code inconsistencies or things that regularly kind of create conflict with something that people often do. And one example that I'll point to is the council may remember when we brought a revision or an ordinance to change the setbacks for sheds. We had a kind of a somewhat convoluted way that shed setbacks were determined. Even though under the building code, you're allowed to build a shed of up to 120 square feet and not need a building permit for it. The setbacks were different depending on the height of that shed, even though the building code would still allow you to do it under either height. And so that was something that just regularly caused consternation and problems for the community members when they talked to a contractor to have a shed built. The contractor knew about the exemption in the building code, but didn't know that we may have different rules based on, if they put a flat roof on it or a pitched roof on it, basically. And so that's just one example, but we have that. Right now, our swimming pool setbacks are unique to, I think, the entire county, and nothing else in the code is consistent with the swimming pool setbacks. I have kind of a laundry list of these that we keep track of, and so the idea is as we either work through some other ordinance work, we may tack on some of these cleanup items, or if we identify something that is somewhat of a process, kind of makes a process more complicated, we may bring that in and propose that to the city council. And we'll actually, a good example is we have a lot split coming to the city council at the next meeting. I would like to ask the council at a future opportunity, you know, if they want to see minor subdivisions like a lot split, you know, given that it's a very straightforward process. Most cities do not take that small of a subdivision to the city council. You can actually move lot lines around at a staff level decision. A lot line adjustment or a lot merger is done by the staff, but a lot split requires a trip to the planning commission and the city council, which isn't the most efficient process. So just those types of things. So both kind of, I would say, some cleanup efforts, some consistency improvements, and some efficiency improvements are all included in that list or that item.
Great. Thank you, that makes sense.
Anybody else have anything on the community development page?
No, addressed my concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. You want to go on to Public Works, Mayor Sparks?
Sure, I'm loving this, I get to go first all the time thing. Thank you. Let's see, the Public Works, I wanted to, I don't know what the trash implementation plan project entails. I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit. And then also the well 1A and well 3 treatment renewal and replacement project. I'm wondering if there's any opportunity to do some cleanup on the wooden structures there as well, with some of the dry rot and just cosmetic issues, but paint and stuff like that, if that would be part of it, or if it's really just looking at the treatment part of it.
Craig Scott, Public Works Director, City Engineer. So the trash implementation plan is a requirement of our MS4, our stormwater permit with the regional board. And we went ahead and prepared it and presented it to council a few years ago. And the regional board has not yet approved it, but the 10-year clock is still being ticking. So we have 7 years now to implement that plan, which is presents its own CIP, its own capital improvement program. And the first one, which is to put in full capture devices in downtown, in the downtown area. And so we decided after 3 years it's time, whether or not the plan gets approved, to go ahead and get started. So we're not looking at going into year 9 and not having done anything. So the trash implementation plan is on our city's website, and it spells out what that phased approach is. The second question you had was about the well 1A and well 3 treatment. It is just for renewing the treatment systems that are at both of those sites, and it does not address re-roofing, siding. You know, those places are starting to show their age, and the paint is peeling. They're pretty unsightly actually right now. So I have been talking with the superintendent as to what we can do about that, and whether it rises to the level of a capital project or not, or if we can just do it as O&M is something we're having discussions about.
Can I ask a follow-up? Trash implementation plan, you had said it's stormwater related, that plan. Is there any way to be more inclusive of other trash? Like I know we had brought up before along the Laguna, some of the different trash pickups that are needed. Or is that part of the active transportation plan? Or can it be more inclusive, that trash implementation plan?
Those two are kind of non-connected. The trash implementation plan took a very comprehensive approach to, one, identifying if the city has a trash problem. It doesn't really, but it put into perspective where the relative trash areas are. It's very low in Cotati. We're very fortunate. We did not have any high trash areas. We had a low and a medium. So those are the ones we're tackling. So it was a very comprehensive approach. Like, where does the trash show up in the city? And what are the, where do they come, where does the trash get generated from, and then how do we address that? So I didn't catch the
Yeah, I wasn't
nexus
sure.
with the ATP, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't sure because I know we brought up before that some community members take it upon themselves to deal with trash pickups along the Laguna Trail. And so when it's been brought up before, I thought that it was discussed as part of an overall bigger active transportation plan.
For the, yeah.
Process.
For the Creek Trail Maintenance Project, to look at, garbage can locations along the creek, to see if we can do a better job with that. That was part of it. We did talk also about the creek cleanup in September, taking a more active role in that. The trash implementation plan is more upstream capture, trying to prevent it from getting into the creek to begin with. We're trying to capture it in the storm drains on the front end.
Okay, just because there was community members doing it, taking it on themselves to do that. So I don't know where that project could live.
What's actually become very effective is finding businesses like gas stations, Lowe's, for example, and just having a rapport with their site manager. And they've agreed to, in the past, to having staff go out on their site and just pick up trash a couple times a week. So it's small things like this, the trash that are really effective in preventing the trash from getting into the creek in the first place.
So the trash implementation plan that the water board still hasn't approved did contain a lot of sort of education elements and sort of trying to prevent trash from getting into the waterways in the first place, right? Did that plan also include these full capture devices, or was the plan an alternative to try to avoid having to do the full capture?
It's a mix of the soft stuff like public outreach to harder stuff like street sweeping, and reaching out to businesses and what was your point?
Well, just
yeah. Right. So there's like we can present in the plan, propose other methods, but they're more discretionary and they rely on regional board discretion to approve or not to approve. However, the full capture devices are, you put in a full capture device, okay, it's good. You meet that requirement. It's black and white. So that's what we've decided to go with.
Okay. So Mayor Sparks, did that answer your questions about the trash implementation plan? Oh, and go ahead.
I just had one follow-up, which was, if we're in year 7 of the 10-year cycle already, how have we internally broken it up into phases, and do we have, how many more, if we're doing phase 1 now, how many more phases are there? And are we going to be able to achieve them? And will the plan ever get approved? I guess those are my questions.
Yes, we're moving forward now because it looks feasible. If we get started now, in 2 or 3 years, we can get it accomplished. It's not 10 years of spending significant amounts of money in each of those 10 years. We have maybe 3 years worth of effort, and then we're done.
Okay, great, thank you.
And Councilmember Harvey.
Craig, do we know why the water board has not approved our plan? It seems that was like forever ago that was submitted.
They haven't approved, the water board has not approved anybody's plan. And,
Why?
I mean, on the surface, I think it might be because of the turnover they've had with staff. But I mean, they just haven't approved the plans and everybody knows it and we're pressing them for it, but.
So I'm trying to remember what the law was that was presented that made us have to do that. In that legislation, they're not held to any, they're not held to anything. I mean, a few years seems totally unreasonable, because we had to spend money to get that completed because it had to be done in a very specific and special way. And it just seems, just really unacceptable to not hear back either a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a thumbs side, nothing is not okay.
Yeah, so we're, in light of that, we're taking the best approach we can think of to build a good case that we're meeting the intent of the law.
Okay.
So,
The Russian River Watershed Association Executive Board meets with the director of the Regional Water Board a couple times a year, and has been making this a point of emphasis at those meetings and she's very non-committal as to she can't commit on behalf of her board, of course, when they're gonna make a decision.
I mean, because they can also contract that out to have someone look at these plans and at least, say, yeah, we got it, and it looks kind of okay, or, it needs some work or something. It just seems, kind of ridiculous, but.
So we're in year 3 of the 10-year implementation? Okay. And as I understand it, we're fairly fortunate in that we have a few points where we can install complete capture devices and cover ourselves versus somebody like Santa Rosa that has many, many more, or something like that. Okay. Anything more on Public Works? Okay. And Police. Let's see, I'll start with people in the room first. Councilmember Lemus, do you have anything you want to raise there? Councilmember Harvey? Well, you get to go first again, Mayor Sparks.
Great, thank you. I just had a question about the BOLA wrap program. It says full deployment. I'm wondering, what does that mean? I know we did a pilot project, so what does scaling up to full deployment mean?
Well, I can answer that, Mayor. So with regards to the full deployment, basically we had what we called the pilot program was that the supervisors have the BOLA wrap and to see if that was something that we would utilize further. In the last few years, we've utilized it once. The need for it is something that put it basically, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, was in the green, and we put it a little bit lower now in terms of a full deployment for all of our staff. So I want to look at that and also the aspect of it. There are some issues with the BOLA wrap that have come up in general. So in terms of us spending resources and money to buy more of the BOLA wrap and then spread it out across staff, I have some concerns about the utilization of it, at least in terms of its effectiveness, because there's very limited scenarios that actually exist where I think the BOLA wrap will actually be effective. And I don't want to obviously give our staff and the community a sense that somehow this is going to be something that's going to help us when in fact it might be something that just ends up being a bit of an obstacle when trying to render situations safe. So anyway, there's more to do in my opinion, and I want to look a little further into it before we do a full deployment.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, and I had nothing more on that page either. So we've worked through all the pages. Any more comments or questions? Do you need anything more from us?
No, I don't need anything other than just any feedback, and then we'll, just based on any feedback we got tonight, we'll just finalize it, and then.
So I have a few comments about the process, and I think the new way of presenting projects is really helpful. I appreciated Administrative Services also included an hour column, which is just a multiplier of FTE, I think, but it's easier for me to understand hours than 0.02 FTE. So I appreciated that column, but that's a very minor point. The other, I think the green, yellow, red strategy listing the projects that were completed, that we expect to be completed as of the end of this year, is super helpful. I also think that the bulk of the work that staff does is not here because it's in the daily, business as usual sheets, which we had at a previous session but aren't here. I actually think those are important to keep whenever we're talking about all the work that's getting done, because I don't want people to look at this packet and think that this is the sum total of what's happening here. I think it's important to keep those around. So even though it's extra paper, I would advocate for keeping the daily charts around as well. Anybody here more? Mayor Sparks.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. I think the green, yellow, red is fantastic, and I really like the new format of the plan, and I appreciate that there was a lot of work that went into generating that. So thank you very much. My only comment was I really am interested in the police lights on program. I saw it was sort of ranked as red, and I'm wondering if it's possible to maybe bump that up to yellow. Because I just think that's a fantastic program. I'd love to see us do that if we can.
Yeah, I'll speak to that again. I definitely agree, and it's something that some of the other neighboring agencies are using, and it's something we want to go at as aggressively as we can. The issue is right now is we reached out to them, and they're essentially stacking requests right now. So to the extent to which they can accommodate law enforcement on their end too is a little bit of a sticking point right now. So I know there's an agency, they're basically on a wait list for that. So it's one of those things I think that as soon as we are able to push the button on that, then we'll be off and running. So wherever we want to put it, really we could put it in any of the colors, but we're, as the city manager said, sometimes these things kind of because of either grant money or whatever, we're relying on another entity in that regard. But from our end, for sure, we're in the green from our end in terms of our motivation and wanting to do it. And now it's just a matter of working with the other entity to try to get them so we're at the top of the stack.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That makes sense. Appreciate it.
That's very helpful. Anything more from the council on this 6A? Okay, great. Thanks for joining us, Chief. I hope you're enjoying your conference. I don't know if you're staying for the next item, but you're welcome to. All right.
I will.
Okay, great. So on to item 6B.
Yeah, thank you. So Angela will be taking this one.
So perfect. Good evening, Mayor, remote, council members, fellow staff, and community attendees online. This evening, we're presenting to you our general fund operational proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25. Next slide, please. So during this study session, we'll be going over the tentative budget schedule again, then dive into the general fund operating revenues and expenses. Some additional items were included with the agenda packet, and they include the revised projects we just went over and Damien presented. And then the general fund workbooks, which include the detailed revenues and expense reports, allocated contract services as a comparison to prior year, and that's a summary by the type of contract services, as well as the budgetary comparative staffing schedules. Next slide. So we're now, if you can believe it, about halfway through the budget studies with the next session happening on a Monday, May the 13th. So get your calendars out. The tentative budget adoption date is set for June 11th. So once we get all this wrapped up, we're going to be running to get all these pulled together in a beautiful budget book for you guys to hopefully adopt. Next slide. So for all the budgets, we have to start with some assumptions. It really is a pie in the sky and pull ourselves back into reality for estimates on these inflows of revenues as well as expenditures. So for revenues, we continue to rely on consulting experts who have this specific industry knowledge and information about our city to estimate future revenues. This is really focused on our property taxes as well as our sales taxes. For the infrequent or other non-significant revenue assumptions, we really use our staff experience and historical knowledge of what has transpired and how it plays out to our revenue sources as receivable for the general fund. For expenditures, there's continued uncertainty around expenses still. I think we're a little bit more even-keeled than when we went into the budget study last year, but the city did anticipate continuing inflation factors at a minimum during this next fiscal year, and so the current budget proposes for 24-25 was managed in a way to try and reduce costs as much as manageable and not to inflate or guesstimate what we think inflation factors might be. So it was trying to really think that that's not going to continue to happen. So our expenditures might not be as conservative as they were last year because it was a completely different environment then. But again, we're going into elections, things are changing. So that's currently not built into this. Other unknowns were also covered in our projects, so we have uncertainties around federal, state, and regional legislation that we are going to have to address whether we have money or not, and there's not going to be, mandated reimbursements that come to pay for those on the most part. So next slide. Overall for the budget, for operations, we do try and find that balance with the revenues. Revenues are limited, so we do have to meet a continued growth for our service levels, and we want to continue to provide the best service for our community with this almost flatlined revenue. So what is included are all the assumed direct and allocated contract services for the city, which for the largest part is our insurance cost, which is currently based on an estimate of $942,000 for the year, which is an increase of $230,000 or almost a 32% increase. That's presented in packet page 24. Again, this is some relative early estimates that we're getting from them, but it's built in here. Other items included are the proposed ADP to CalPERS that we talked about in the last study. And so that's estimated or was proposed at $335,000, of which $273,000 is for the general fund, because we allocate that across based on our personnel who also serve in the water and sewer. And additionally, what is not included are any MOU assumptions. So we currently have the CPOA and CPMA that are in negotiations. So they're basically flat in here. It does include like steps or things that are guaranteed, based on the positions they're at now, but no other adjustments have been included in the current budget. Next slide. So what's in the proposed budget, getting a little bit further. And step back. So what is the general fund? So this is really for our communities, maybe watching this in the future or remotely. So the general fund is our primary fund that we use for the government entity. This provides all the key core services such as police, public works, recreation, community development, city management. But what is not included in our study tonight is the infrastructure funding, which will be coming back in a future session. So these are our operating costs. So it also does not include our debt service for those bond payments where the general fund does fund over to the debt service fund to pay those payments. Next slide. So our goal, we have to meet that minimum reserve of the 25% of our operating expenses per our resolution. So that will be significantly looking into based on where we have our revenues and expenditures currently to date, where there is really only a delta of $1.2 million in the proposed budget. The revenues are increased from 23 to 24, or from 23-24 adopted budget. So the revenue from the estimate, we have an increase of 2.3%, and from the adopted budget to our proposed budget is 2.96%. So really the delta between our estimated revenues for this year, 23-24, and what we're proposing are almost flat. Again, this does include our additional discretionary payment to CalPERS, as we discussed. What's included in the staffing cost is really flat. It has increases that are included in the MOUs. We have increases based on what's negotiated. We have our full FTE, so we do budget based on our full FTE. So if we have any vacant positions, we still budget as if they are here and working with us. We are continuing to do the lump sum payment to CalPERS at the beginning of the payment plan, thus reducing our interest costs owed to them. And we do have increased health insurance cost that is included in the salaries and benefits numbers as well. Other significant cost changes, if I can't, hammer insurance, it's still uncertain, so we'll get a better number when we bring this back, but it is expected to significantly continue to increase. The capital outlay, what is included in here for capital is a replacement equipment. For the public works, we have some equipment that's aged out, diesel equipment that just needs to be replaced, and we've kind of pushed and done some other equipment first and some other fleet first in order to get some efficiencies there. But we have approximately 147,000 of public works vehicles that need to be, that are scheduled and are included in the costs for the general fund for this fiscal year. Additionally, we have increases to utilities. If you haven't heard, PG&E is increasing their rates. So we've based this on an assumption of a 22% increase on our historical PG&E, which is due to the 13% that they approved in January 1 and an additional 7.2% that they approved in March. So again, it's a relative estimate on where we're expecting our PG&E costs to come in, and those run our street lights, our buildings, everything else. So again, that's allocated across the different departments. Again, contract services increase of approximately 6% as they just increase their costs, or we've expanded our services, so we have new contracts as well. Increased legal is based on other special legal services that we have programmed for as needs. Next slide. So here's a presentation of our proposed fiscal year 24-25 inflows or revenues for the general fund compared to fiscal year 23-24 estimates. And this is where it really compares where we're expecting to come in for 23-24 to our proposed budget. And you can see that they're basically flat with a 0.6% increase over where we're expecting to be this fiscal year. Next slide. Again, here's just another view of the same information where it's a graphic showing there's really little anticipated change between the inflows overall, between the different major inflows for fiscal year 24-25 as proposed. Next slide. And this is my graphic where it shows really how important our sales tax are to the city. Basically, if you draw a line across the sales tax big box on the left-hand side, half of that would be our Measure S. The other half is our Bradley Burns that make a majority of our inflows for the general fund. Next slide. So our property tax projections include the CPI, assessors applied CPI of 2%. What we had historically included in property tax was some new development. We've had other developments that we knew were coming online, things that had just finished being built, had approximate valuations. We currently didn't have a significant valuation for something that we knew that was in the works and permits had already been pulled. And so there's no assumption for new significant contributions or bottom line new assessments that are going into the property tax other than the CPI. The total overall change is around 9%. And this is due to historical new undervalued. We were more conservative on the property tax previously with what had come online. And so now we're back to where we should be. Sales tax projections, so we have a minor increase of sales of some inflation. People are buying more still, you know, or offset. So we just don't know where sales tax are going to be coming in. We do have our major industries that are here that support our sales tax, and as well as the county pool for all those online sales. Next slide. Our other tax is primarily made up of the cannabis business tax. We are estimating that to be around $700,000 for the next fiscal year, as our cannabis businesses are stabilizing again post-COVID, and everyone, as well as growing a little bit here and there. And we're also being more diligent around the sales tax compliance and the audits and reviews and pulling in our actual receipts that we should be receiving for those operations. Additionally, we have the licenses, permits, and franchises, where there's just a small increase in the franchise taxes being brought in. Next slide. Other agencies are consistent and are just primarily driven by the public safety contract with SSU. Charges for services, so this is where the development, community development and public works. So we have a decrease in revenues for 24 and 25, and that is again just due to the uncertainty of the projects. You know, we have a lot of projects coming in, going out, but they're really unsure right now when they are going to be. So we'd rather be conservative and not plug in additional revenues that we then rely on for other projects that might not come to fruition. Police charges have just continued to remain consistent and again are also relatively uncertain based on what activities they have going on or collections. Other revenues are primarily now investment earnings that have increased but are subject to rate risk in our pool. So we have a significant balance that are in the camp fund. And so as interest rates come down, those returns would also in turn decrease. And contract class revenue from recreation continues to increase as we're coming out post-COVID. People are doing more events and stuff, but we did kind of keep that at a slow growth rather than the projected growth because we run into capacity issues. You can't have a Katati room rented every single day, every hour of the day, so you kind of have to have it at a steady, slow growth. So that is the inflows, so all of the revenue from the city. So the next slide, we'll go into the expenses. And again, we've gone over a lot of these high level, what's gone into the expenses, the CalPERS, contract services, so I'm not gonna dig into them too far because I think we've kind of covered over most of them or all of them when we're going over the summary of what went into the budget, because these key items are really what are driving the outliers and the specific increases to the different departments and activities. So again, that's the CalPERS, including the ADP, contract services. So we have allocated contract services, which are allocated based on your FTE of the department and each individual's allocations to their activities. So say someone from my department, we also work in water and sewer. So we have, 70% of our time is admin services, and then another 15% is water and 15% is sewer. So when we allocate that contract, our whole entire FTE is allocated based on the total FTE allocation of all of our employees. So when you think of departments that have larger numbers of individuals, they tend to get larger percentages of the allocated contracts. So police department, for example, they have the largest FTE. We have a large increase in insurance. They get the largest allocation of the insurance. So that's how that is included in their budget. Just talked about insurance, and then everyone's staffed at a full FTE. So again, if you have the largest staff in the city, even if you have 3 vacant positions, the allocated contracts are based on a static point in time when we do our budget, and that's how it's allocated, whether you fill those positions or not. Next slide. So the proposed operating expenses by category are presented here with overall increase of 7% over the estimated actuals for fiscal year 23-24. I like presenting this because budget assumptions, when you just compare budget to budget, which is what is included in packet page, I believe, 22, it shows a different picture because you're not comparing the most recent data. It's data that we had from last year that we were making different assumptions based on. So the majority of the changes, as you see, are in the salaries and benefits, and then again, legal and other insurance. So again, when we compare an estimated actual, we're estimating, or we have some real numbers on who our salaries and benefits are going to, so that number is going to be less, as opposed to our proposed budget, which has an increase because we're budgeting based on full FTE, where our estimated actuals are more realized. We recognized that those positions have been vacant. That department expense has been now redistributed into where we expect it to be at the end of the fiscal year based on actuals for the estimated budget. Next slide. So then the other way we look at this is by the individual departments, and again, the same 7% change, with the majority of the changes based on it is included within the city manager's department, and then the city council will go a little bit farther into what is included within each department and why what's included in those departmental budgets to make them alter over the years. Next slide. So again, this is very similar to our FTE breakout. You can see that the police department is over half of the expenses and is over half of our FTE. And then it then breaks out almost proportionally between the different departments, where we have Public Works would be the next highest FTE, and also the next highest budgeted department at 18%. And then I think all the way down to City Council and Code Enforcement and Recreation at 5%. And again, this does not include any of our capital outflows or our major debt service. Next slide. So here is a summary of our contract services that are allocated across the different departments and the general fund, as well as the water and sewer funds. The packet page 24 shows a detailed list of each one of the contract services, what they're being used for that classification, and the change over time. And again, I've kind of hit the key major ones, which are really insurance, legal, our biggest movers in this category for our proposed budget for next year. Next slide. So the City Council includes some of the following changes. We have the continued allocation of the indirect costs, the utilities, contract services. Some other expenses include changes to the dues and subscriptions and travel and allocated insurance. So those have been some changes within the City Council department to increase those to the level that's being currently used. The City Manager's department includes public information services, as well as there's specific new contracts for, what we need to do is kind of grow some of our revenues, and what we can do to do that is some economic development work and impact fee studies. And so that's specific contracts that have now been added under the City Manager's department. And next year, or this next fiscal year, is also an election year. And so we do have some estimated election expense that we will have incurred, as well as staff time used for that election. Next slide. So for the admin services, every time we get new revenues, it seems to be like fees and everything else seem to increase. Whenever you get something new coming in, they're going to find some other way to charge you. So we do keep those fiscal fees in the admin services department, because we're the ones that are processing the checks. We can kind of manage and make sure that they're in line with what they should be charging us for managing our revenue streams. So those are included in the admin services, and they continue to increase. The community development, we did have some changes in how we are using the contract services. We previously included pass-through contracts. So these are contracts that we enter into for development, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Damien, but development projects where we have a deposit account for them, and then we have outside consultants that are doing the work. But then the developers have to pay for those contract services. Previously, we were including all of those kind of contracts as a budget item within primarily the community development department as they are managing those contracts. So it really the contract belongs under them, and that's the not to exceed amount for the contract. And so we're properly recording them and tracking them. However, it's misleading for it to be in their budget because we have offsetting revenues that are really paying for those contract services directly. So we've now moved a majority of those contracts directly over to our deposit account fund, where that's where we collect the revenues to pay for those contracts from. That way it's a direct wash. We're not inflating the general fund expenditures unnecessarily for something that's going to be neutral as far as revenues and expenses. So that was a significant change for them. Public Works, we have some, specifically, it's really the increase in utility costs for PG&E and water. We also have added redundant internet services for the courtyard. We were talking about how important it is to have our SCADA software up. And that also included, as we know, redundant internet service, because when you have a fiber line, you wouldn't think it would ever go down, but when it does go down, it can cause some other issues. So we wanted to make sure we were providing that redundant internet service. So that's a new, as well as since Public Works has all of the parks, they now also have the new Wi-Fi that we've set up and established the fiber connection there for La Plaza Park. So that's a new cost that's included there in Public Works. There's other additional costs that we've added is one-time costs for new lights and other repairs and maintenance that have continued to kind of increase in cost, and that's more of the inflationary piece where they have the direct materials costs where they're seeing that component. And again, the vehicles, as we previously discussed, the 147,000 of vehicle replacements for this year. Next slide. So on to the police services, they have the continued investment in technology with the consortium. So that's an ongoing thing and continues to increase. I think we're in the process of replacing the MDCs this next fiscal year. We're going to have some additional costs for training and the correlated overtime to offset the training because we have the shift coverage, so somebody will be off and on. And then there's significant other expenses, which include, again, those allocated expenses. They have the largest FTE, so their budget appears to continue to increase, but a lot of it is these allocated things that we're putting on their department because otherwise it would just be an allocated department. Recreation. So we have the Rec Desk annual software contract renewals coming up, and then significant other expenses are the allocated insurance, the bank fees that go with Rec Desk. So there's a proportionate fee that we use as they continue to use Rec Desk more, have more fees collected through it. The fees that we have to pay are then attributed. And then we also have programmed in there some not equipment, but some table or other small supplies that need to be replaced as well in the different rooms or units. Code compliance for the estimated fiscal year end 23-24 is significantly higher as we have other events happening, and so we expect the next fiscal year to return to a more normal costing in 24-25. Next slide. So it is an operational balanced budget. We're maintaining prudent fund reserves. We're going to look at our availability for other expenses once we get down into what our fund balance estimates are going to be, what capital projects we want to elevate to the level after debt service. And so that will be coming back to council at the next meeting. We're going to continue to update the council on any significant changes. We have insurance changes that come to us before the next meeting. We'll also make sure that's included and brought back to council for consideration before the full general fund budget comes back. We're going to make sure the operational reserves are continued to be met in the general fund, and we're going to continue to commit prudence and integrity and making sure that our estimates and evaluations of what are going into the proposal, as well as our estimated actuals, are in line with where it needs to be. And so I think that's the end of my presentation, and I'll take lots of questions, I'm sure.
Questions from council members? Councilmember Harvey.
On the sum of contracts page, Angela, I think there's just a typo on there. The total should, I believe, be 1793195. Okay. And then on the elections, has the county gotten cheaper? Seems like everything they do is more expensive because typically election services have always run us in the more $30,000 range. Are they cutting us a deal?
Yeah, Kevin might be able to address that. I think he's in touch with the ROV on that.
Yes, the estimate that we got from the ROV was between 10 and 30,000. So 20,000 is the midpoint there.
Okay.
And I think that's more in line with the bills that we usually see actually post-election, unless there's an unusual number of measures or something that we put on locally.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And thank you for all the detail.
Yeah, Councilmember Lemus. Sure.
Okay, so on the first page, under city manager, I show a difference of about, between the comparison 1 and comparison 2, like 234,000. So I'm not sure if that's because of contracts or new positions.
Well, I do know that there were some of the contracts that were mentioned in Angela's slide presentation. So it's a couple, I think it's a couple factors. One is the contract, there's an economic development contract proposed. There's, which is 25,000. There's a impact fee study contract proposed, which I believe is 43,000. And then there's, for the microgrid project, if, there's a $75,000 reserve for that. That's part of it. And that's really because how those ESCO contracts work is we would, if we initiate that project, they would do an initial high-level evaluation that's like no obligation, no strings attached type thing. But it's pretty high level just to do a real cursory exploration of where some opportunities might be. And then if they get into a detailed design, like a design level that would lead to construction, for example, then you have to commit to the design costs. The design costs, that's if you pull out of the project. Like you get the design done and you look at the costs and you're like, we don't want to do this, or maybe it's, there's no way we could fiscally, manage it right now, and you just want to terminate the contract, then that's what that is. So you would basically, to back out of those types of contracts, you have to just pay the design cost, and then you're done. And sort of the third tier is if you actually move forward with the project. Oftentimes those projects, they try to structure them so that they're self-paying, that they save costs. With with battery storage, I'm not sure, but oftentimes that's how they structure these contracts, is that they structure them so that you'd save, like say you save $100,000 a year in utility costs, and that would be sort of your debt service to that project. And so it's like a net, it's either a little bit of a savings or it's a net no cost type project.
So it's just like an estimate right now?
It's a reserve. We may not use it at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was trying to reconcile that for city manager, the 234,000 additional. And then when I looked at the contract, it's about 120,000 over, 120K over. So I was trying to see where does that 234 come from on that one. Let me see. And I think on the other, I'm looking at the budget comparison report, revenue count detail, the second page in the back under contributions and scholarship funding and awards. It's minimal amounts, but I was just wondering, what type of contributions or scholarships do we do? Is that for students or is that?
For recreation scholarships, I believe is what we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're primarily recreation scholarships. Their big fundraiser is the yard sale that they do. They actually derive quite a bit for the scholarships at that point in time. And then they also, when they're at the farmer's market, they also usually have something out there so you can donate for scholarships, and that helps students going to camp, kids going to camp. They use those scholarships for economically disadvantaged families, anyone who is asking for financial support. It goes to help pay for them to be able to go to camp.
Okay. Yeah. And then salary benefits, and it has payouts. Is that when people leave or something?
No.
Or is that-
So payouts are an additional cost. So if you've banked leave time, we have it within our MOUs that you can actually pay that time out in lieu of having to take time off. So if you've banked enough time off, you could actually get a payout of that time.
Okay.
So it's not, yeah.
Okay. I was just trying to understand what that was.
Yeah.
Okay, those are my questions I have right now. Thank you.
Thanks. Mayor Sparks?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I just had a couple of high-level thoughts. So one is, as you're working through the annual budget, do you compare with similar cities in terms of percentages in our different departments, how that looks compared to, our standard comparison cities or anything like that?
No, we currently do not have that as a practice, because I think as much as, and again, this might be my perspective, we can try and derive that, but each city has different departments that might do similar things, but we will all do different things. And the fact that we use contract services for support for some departments, you can't always compare FTE and salaries and benefits. Compare, we use contracts for some things, and they serve in lieu of a person here, like our building official or whatever. They're not a person here, so directly comparing how we operate to serve our community compared to another community would be pretty difficult. I think what could be comparative is total operating revenues or revenues by type of our major revenue sources, that make up our balances, and total operating expenses. And maybe on a per capita basis would maybe be another rational basis. I know we do follow our sales tax per capita compared to the rest of the cities in Sonoma County. We're always on the top. It's pretty nice.
Yeah. But that's just due to the fact that there's a lot of people that don't live in the community that buy stuff in our community.
Yeah.
That's why the per capita is, that's why we do so well in the per capita.
Yeah. But it's those type of things that, finding a direct comparable on a departmental level to compare expenses and personnel, and, it's pretty difficult.
No, I know it's certainly not an exact comparison, but I do know some other cities have identified problematic areas that have developed in their practices over years by comparing with other jurisdictions and finding out, wait, why are we doing it this way? Nobody else is doing it this way. And so I think it's a useful practice in general. I'm not asking that we get as council comparisons with our comparable cities, just it can be a good way to spot where we're sort of out of line, if that is ever happening.
I will say when we do our contract services, and part of our procurement policy and process is to go out to bid, to go get comparables. We, communicate with our like-minded individuals that are in different cities, who they're using, how much it's costing them, in order to make sure we're getting, I don't want to say the best bang for our buck, but relatively that it's a reasonable expenditure, that it's coming to fruition or is playing out in our budget as proposed.
Yeah, great, thanks. What's my other? I just want to reiterate a concern that we continue to budget for full staffing, even if there's a historical, not just a trend, but a absolute, we never are fully staffed. And so I want to figure out some way to acknowledge that we're budgeting it fully staffed because we want to be able to staff up if suddenly we find people, but figure out how to accurately reflect the fact maybe at the end of the year that we didn't fully staff, and therefore rather than just treat, okay, we saved $400,000 by understaffing, not filling positions this year, that rather than that automatically just being added to reserves without discussion, to talk about, okay, that's money we didn't spend this year, that we need to think about that's now available for perhaps projects or fixing roads or whatever in the coming year, rather than just adding it to the reserves, which we never talk about spending. So just a comment for future years.
If I can add, I think that would be a great item to add to our mid-year, because that really is a good point in time where we know what positions we haven't added for the year, and those are definitely savings that we've already had.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea, and a great time to, look back at the projects lists and look at, okay, we've got some money that we haven't spent now. Maybe some of those yellow and red projects we can figure out a way to make happen with consultants or whatever we can do mid-year. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that some years what we have done is to bring down some of that reserve, and we've been able to reinvest in different infrastructure, exactly what you're talking about. We kind of let it build up, but then that has allowed us, in particular on roads, to do some significant things that ordinarily we would not have been able to do.
Great. One final comment is our practice of forcing ourselves to have, say, a $1.5 million gap between operational expenses and operational revenue in order to transfer that money to capital projects to do the ongoing street maintenance, or I'm not sure exactly how we account for that, makes it look like, if you read the budget presentations, like we're always running a $1.5 million surplus, which is not accurate, and I don't like it that our budget books make it look that way. And I don't know how that, could be fixed to show a balanced budget by showing a expense line for that street maintenance expense, so that the revenue and expense graphs don't always show this big surplus. Because we always ask about that surplus and say, well, it looks like there's plenty of room there to do some more projects, and then you always point out, no, that's actually already accounted for. Well, then it shouldn't show as a surplus in the revenue versus expenses graph. I think if we really know what we're spending that money on, then those should be. And I'm not sure how to accomplish it. It's just. Okay. Anything more? Oh, Mayor Sparks.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with that very much. If there's some way we can plan for that $1.5 million or whatever it ends up being each year, and display it in the budget, I'd be supportive of that. I think that'd be a good practice.
Anything more on this item, the budget study session for the general fund? Do you need anything more from us, Angela or Damien?
No, thank
Okay.
you. I think that's all that we needed, and then
Yeah.
look forward to bringing the rest of it back very soon.
Great, thank you. All right, we have one final item, which is going to be a closed session, conference with city labor negotiators, with the city designated representative being the city manager, and the employee organization being Cotati Police Officers Association and the Cotati Police Management Association. So before we go, I'll open that for public comment if anybody wants to make any. There is nobody in the room, so can you ask on Zoom?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Ford. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon if you'd like to make a public comment on this item. Vice Mayor Ford, that'll end public comment.
Great. All right, we will now adjourn to closed session, and we'll report out when we're done. And so you have a Zoom link for Laura? Okay, great. See you soon. All right, we're returning from closed session at 8:24. We have nothing to report from closed session. And was there any information received after the agenda was posted?
Not this time, Vice Mayor Ford.
Okay, great. So we will adjourn at 8:24.